Hi, I'm Mackenzie.
Hey, I'm Denise, and welcome to the podcast from Rundown to Renewed.
We are continuing through the fruit of the Spirit, and we can find this in Galatians 5:22 to 23. It reads, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. Against such things there is no law."
All right, so we're going to talk about gentleness today, and we loved putting this episode together. I'm
Yes.
very excited to share with you. And I think, a few things to note would be, we may think of gentleness as kind of this submissive quality that suggests maybe we're insecure or we feel inferior in situations, um, we we're not necessarily like putting ourselves out there, but I think some of the absolute strongest women I know are gentle.
Yeah. I think that sometimes also women that are gentle, they're not usually the loudest person in the
Mhm,
room.
mhm.
You don't always know their opinions about everything, but they're the ones that hold really deep convictions and stand up for themselves and
Mhm.
for their family when they feel like they're being pushed back against a wall.
Yeah, yeah, there is that soft exterior, but they like make no mistake. Like these women have the full armor of God on. They don't
Yes.
they don't play.
Yeah.
And they will fight the good fight when it matters for those who they love, for God, for everything that is good and right in the world. Watch out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that gentleness does not indicate weakness
Mm-mm.
at all.
No, no.
And it's this quiet inner strength that chooses to nurture her soft and tender heart when the world is just trying to harden it.
Hmm.
And, I think about the world and how it tries to harden your heart. And it's like when you are facing adversity or put in tough challenges, the world tells you you don't deserve this. It tells you you deserve better.
Hmm.
It tells you
Hmm.
all of these things, which in turn can make you bitter towards these situations. And it does harden your heart.
Yeah.
And, it takes more effort to stay gentle in these situations versus be like just lashing out and
Right. Reacting.
reacting
Hmm.
right off of your emotions.
Yeah. And I think, we all face trials. We all go through things. And we have to armor up against it really does take so much effort to like armor up and just continue to keep that gentleness about you, that hope for good and right and justice in the midst of whatever it is that you may be going through. That's a gentle spirit,
Yeah.
and so being gentle, you're going to hold your firm beliefs, right? And values, and that's going to allow you, a gentle person, to like live in like this assurance that god's God loves you and God's in control. And so as a result, God's light is able to shine through you as his presence, and it just reflects his goodness, his love, his kindness, his mercy. All of those things are able to shine through when we choose that gentleness.
Mm.
And again, it's a tricky, it's 100% doable, but it does take can you like sense how much strength that has to take,
Yeah.
right? That's not an easy task.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, with gentleness in these situations, it's the ability to like have the wield this sword, right? To be able to
Mm,
fight,
mhm,
but also
mhm,
having the wisdom and discernment on when to take that sword out and when to keep it in its sheath.
mhm,
And like meekness suggests that someone defers to the way of Jesus,
mhm,
acting out of his will instead of their own.
mhm.
And we're going to talk about someone today
So
that
special.
exemplifies this
Yeah.
perfectly.
And I think like a couple weeks ago we talked about being in battle
Mm.
and how we're all up against something, we're all dealing with our own things,
Yeah.
and in those things, what are we, how are we choosing to respond?
Right.
Not react. How do we
Mm,
respond?
right.
And what do you need to put in your armor, in your arsenal, to help you know when to pull that sword out and when to
Mhm.
keep it in and let God fight, right?
Right.
So, we're going to talk about Esther today. I'm so excited. So, we're going to share, there's a lot of backstory to Esther, and
Yeah.
the story of Esther involves, it's more about the bulk of, like, when you read the book of Esther, right? And like, what's so amazing about this is she's one of two women that have a book in the Bible. One is two. The other one's Ruth. And we talked about her recently as well. And there's a lot of characters and there's a lot of things going on. So just like hang tight with us because it's so worth it. But
Yeah.
it's quite the story. And so the book of Esther in the beginning, it starts out with the expulsion of Queen Vashti. Okay, so her husband, King Xerxes, calls his seven eunuchs to present her to his banquet guests in her crown. So it's like she's just kind of this beautiful person to look at. That's what he wants, and that was customary. Women were supposed, like, as the queen, she's supposed to do this, and she just, says no. She completely declines the request. I love her.
So according to law, she didn't obey, so she broke the law. She did
Mhm,
not obey the king. So, in this situation, she had done wrong against the king,
mhm.
against all the guests, against everybody. So this whole thing would cause a big uproar
Yep.
within the city of her denying the king's request.
Mhm.
So they released a decree that she would never be able to be in his presence again. And I have so many questions
Mhm. We both do. Yeah.
that we do not have the answers to. We don't know what
Mm-mm.
that meant, where she went, or anything, but
Mm-mm.
we know that she was not allowed to be in his presence at all.
Mm-mm. Well, because it says when we were kind of reading through the story, it says, that this decree had to be made because if it wasn't, other women wouldn't obey their
Yeah,
husbands.
they'd all
And
start acting
and
up.
because I don't know a woman that acts up at all. But I mean, it's just like, seriously, the amount of control. This isn't necessarily a pretty story.
No,
It's messy.
yeah,
Okay, which is perfect because that's real life.
for
Yeah.
sure.
So if you're ever like, the Bible's boring, false. Okay. So Xerxes now is like, I need another wife, right? He's yearning for another wife. And so this is again the ugly parts of this story. But he had his attendants request young virgins to come to the place for his wife, basically for tryouts. Who's gonna be my wife? Just mm,
So fun.
mm. So this is where we meet Esther. Okay. She lived with her cousin Mordecai in Xerxes' territory.
So all the women that were brought there, they were all treated fair, very nicely. But there was a secret that Esther was hiding,
Mhm.
and that was that she was Jewish, and her people were in exile. So if King Xerxes found this out about her nationality, like she would have a similar fate as his previous wife, Vashti, or even worse.
Mm, okay. So Mordecai insists that she keep her heritage a secret, right? So Esther is given these like designated attendants to tend to her beauty and give her pretty much everything that she needed to present herself to King Xerxes. And so after 10 months of this, right? Can you imagine?
I think this is so interesting
It's
because I just imagine being one of the other girls that are like, I'm going to be the queen. And then it's like 10 months you put into this.
it's like it's like old school bachelorette. Like, what is this? Like,
Yeah, that's what it is. Who
yes,
gets the rose?
who gets the rose? Yes, okay, there you go. So Xerxes, after this 10-month period, so longer than the Bachelorette, Xerxes summons her to his quarters, and he was more pleased with Esther than anyone else. Okay, so she was chosen to be his bride.
Awesome.
Hmm.
So no one knows that Esther is Jewish at this point. It's still a secret. And Mordecai, I love him because he like
Mm.
hangs out at the gates every single day and like watches over Esther from the gates. I like
I love him.
I just imagine the big, huge gates and him like standing there in anticipation of what's happening for the day. They didn't have TVs, so this was their source of entertainment. But Mordecai actually overheard two men talking about assassinating King um, Xerxes while he was standing at the gate. So he goes and tells Esther this,
Mhm,
who then told the king. And all of it ended up being true.
mhm,
They found out that this was actually going to happen. And Esther gave Mordecai the credit. And so now Mordecai has favor with King Xerxes.
mhm, mhm. So after this, right, the king is down two officers. So these officers need to be replaced. So this is where Haman is introduced. Okay. And Haman is, we don't know anything about him really before this part of the story, but he is elevated to the highest seat of honor. So let's just think about his ego here for a minute. It's real big now. Not great. Hmm. And so the king, like, commands everyone to like kneel down to him. But Mordecai does not. He refuses.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, how do you think this would make a man in power that has pride issues feel?
Mm,
It infuriated Haman.
sure. Yep.
And, when he found out that Mordecai was Jewish, he creates this whole plan to just take out all the Jews of the kingdom.
Yep.
And Haman goes to the king and reports about the Jewish people and basically just manipulates the situation to make the king think that these Jewish people are performing and acting in ways that are not best for him. So, um, he even goes as far as to say, I will take care and wipe these people out and I will pay you.
Like he'll give money to the kingdom.
Like, what?
I just
So
so many.
he he is full of pride in
Yeah,
this situation.
very much so. And so the king is like, keep your money, but do whatever you want with these Jews. So a decree is made to destroy all the Jews in one day. But this isn't supposed to happen for 11 months. So can you imagine being a Jew and getting this news like, hey, by the way, we're going to annihilate all of you,
Yeah,
every single one of you, but you have 11 months to wait. That is torture.
that's terrible.
That's torture. And that's mm, not great.
No.
Just absolutely. So now it's not even like that they're in fear of their lives, which they are, but it's also this mind game. Now that's all they're thinking about. So there's
Yeah.
this constant state of fear
Mhm.
in the Jewish people because Haman's just angry because one guy won't bow down to him.
It's so funny how people in power tend to use fear as a tactic to get people to
Hmm,
do what they want.
interesting.
So Mordecai informs Esther of this plan, and he's like, "Hey, you're the queen. Like, use your position
Mhm,
as a
mhm.
way to protect the Jewish people." And she was so wise and gentle that she asked Mordecai and all the other Jewish people to fast with her for 3 days. And she said, she decided she would make a request to the king to have a meeting and to have a banquet, which was against the law, by the way. Women were not allowed to request things from the king.
Not even his wife.
It's crazy.
Mm,
And she said, in by choosing this request, she said, if I perish, I perish.
mhm.
So she was ready to fight for what was right and
Yeah,
for her people.
yeah. So, King Xerxes agrees to meet with her, and so he fulfills this request to have a banquet, and Haman isn't invited to this banquet too, right? So now Haman is just boasting, right? We just come back to this pride in Haman. And, I just think of that quote, pride comes before the fall.
Mhm.
And it's like, be mindful
Yeah.
when that pride creeps in. There's one thing, there is a difference between being confident and being prideful.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of pride here. We're not seeing confidence. We're seeing a lot of pride. And so he's just, he's boasting himself, and he's meeting with his wife and a friend and some friends, and they suggest, but he's so angry about this Mordecai still. Like, he's
Yeah.
just absolutely infuriated with this whole situation. So they just they just blow wind into this flame. Like, they just make it bigger, and they tell him, "Well, why don't you put up a 50-foot pole and you can impale him on it?" And so they are very much in, and Haman absolutely loves this idea.
Yeah. Of course he does.
Of course he does. Yeah. So, can you tell how we feel about Haman?
So that same night, King Xerxes is trying to sleep and he can't sleep. So
Mhm.
he requests to read the book of Chronicles, where all of these things are recorded. And he asks what kind of honor had been done for Mordecai, and was told nothing. So this guy that saved his life was not rewarded for it at all.
Mhm.
So the king says, "Well, who's at the courts? Like, who's in charge right now?" And it was Haman. So he's like, "Bring Haman here." And he presents the question of what should be done for a man of honor. And Haman, in all of his pride and hot head, is like, "Oh, he's talking about me." So
Mhm.
he just talks everything up and is like, "Give him this and this and this."
Mhm.
And so he just totally goes all out on his suggestions.
Oh, yeah. This is one of my favorite parts of this story. Yeah. So then the king's like, "Okay, well, go get all of these things and give them to Mordecai." This is where God has a sense of humor,
Absolutely.
right? Like, so good. So, and he's like, "Don't leave anything suggested undone." So he gets like a royal robe, and Mordecai gets to ride a horseback through town, and Haman has to announce him. Like, it's this whole thing. Like, God just completely shuts Haman down with this. And I just think that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it shows that, God has a sense of humor, but it also shows that God honors his people.
hmm I
And
keep thinking about that song. This is how I fight my battles.
yeah,
Like, this is it. When you let God fight your battles, things like this.
he'll see you through.
Yeah.
And he might even add some humor to it, which is
Usually.
needed.
Usually.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So after all this, like this big parade of Mordecai being presented and, all the things Haman thought he was going to have,
Mhm.
they go to this banquet, and Esther requests protection for her Jewish people. And she exposes that Haman is the one in charge of this plot.
Mhm.
So King Xerxes was furious by this
Mhm.
because, Mordecai is in favor of Xerxes and now his wife.
Yeah.
So you have these two Jewish people that he's trying to kill.
Yeah.
And that pole that Haman got to hang Mordecai from, he was actually hanged on that pole that he had put up for Mordecai.
Mm-mm. Mhm.
So Esther's actions saved the Jewish nation, and not just in the moment, but in the future, because a decree was made that they could fight and stand up for themselves against anyone that came after them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so incredible. And Esther's loyalty to Mordecai, it didn't stop when she became queen
Yeah.
and gained access to the latest and greatest royal resources.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times when we are, when you see people that are, go from like rags to riches, but the riches completely destroy them.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it just it things just shift
Yeah.
so much, and that's when the world can suck you in. We're talking about gentleness. that stuff can, it's not that it's bad, it's what you do with it.
Right.
It's how it shapes you, or how
Yeah.
you allow it to shape you or not
Mhm.
shape you. And Esther didn't allow these things to change her character.
Right. Like God blesses us in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
And we can use that for him or
Mhm.
we can use that for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the part comes in of like, are you going to be gentle and do things in God's way, or are you going to be selfish and try to gain the most out of a situation for yourself?
Right. Well, and Esther could have chosen, like when Mordecai came to her with this is happening, this whole plot is against us. It's Mordecai warns her. He said, we didn't say this earlier, but he warns her, like, if you don't do this, someone else will rise up and do it.
Mm,
And you'll perish because of this.
right.
Because you're not using your power for good. Those aren't his exact words, but it's along those lines. And so um she allowed herself to fully trust Mordecai's guidance. She put a lot of trust and faith in him. And her need to stick up for her people superseded any of her own comfort. She went against the law in doing such a thing, but she gained all this courage in doing so.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that she was afraid.
Yeah.
This was not something that she comfortably just walked in. She knew that this, she said it herself, if I perish, I perish.
Yeah.
She knew that this could have very real consequences for her life. But I think it's like she's looking at, you know, well, if I don't do this, my people perish. And if I do this, I don't know what, I could perish,
Right.
or I could save my people.
Yeah.
And that was a risk worth taking
Hmm.
for her. And so she could have been killed for just even requesting this meeting.
Right.
She could have
Yeah.
been killed, and she did it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Gentleness is
that
bold.
gentleness is bold, and it's strong.
Yeah.
It's strong.
Yeah. So Esther's gentleness allowed her to build important relationships and gain her leverage in a kingdom that threatened to persecute the Jewish people. And like I said before, like
Mm.
she not only saved the people right then, but for generations to come.
Yeah.
So um, she took the actions that were necessary to secure their nation for centuries.
Yeah. That's huge. I think gentleness can be just this, like, opening of your heart to what God is calling you in your to do in your life,
Hmm.
right? It is submitting to the direction that he lays out before you. And in Esther's case, this is a scary thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to note for whatever God calls you to, whatever you feel that God may be leading you towards. It is very possible that that will be something that is out of your comfort zone.
Usually, right?
Usually it is, right? I mean, we've shared, we're life coaches, and we run this podcast, and there's a handful of other things that we both do, and it's, we're putting ourselves out there, but we don't know what the outcome's going to be. But it's like we feel led to do these things. Like,
Right.
we know that God has called us to these things, but we have no idea what the outcome is. And
Yeah.
for me, like, as a single mom, like, income's important. I need to know outcomes of things. And God has me in this place right now where it's like, do you trust me?
Mm, yeah.
Do you trust me? And I've shared before about how, just my mindset around money has been very, um, what's the word? It's not stingy. I can't think of it. It's okay. We'll say,
I'm sorry. I'm not
no,
coming up
that's
with the
okay.
word either.
No, like, we'll say stingy for lack of a better term. It's not that. But just frugal. Frugal's, there it is. It's, my brain. It is what it is. But, it's like, well, but do you try, like, there's just that constant question from God
Yeah.
of, like, do you trust me?
Yeah.
Like, are you going to trust me with opening these doors that you're asking for? And are you going to be willing to go through those doors, whatever that looks like? Like, I think of an open door as one thing, but could an open door be something totally different?
Right.
And keeping that gentleness and that trust and knowing that no matter what, he's gonna take care of me, not just financially, but everywhere. He's gonna take care of me. He's gonna take care of my kids.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of strength
Mm.
and a lot of. There are certain things that I can do on my end that I do, but there are other things that are completely in his hands, and I don't have control over that. And
Nope.
the same was true for Esther. She did what she had to do, but the rest of it was completely up to God.
Yeah.
She had no control over that, and I think that that's such a gentle spirit,
Yeah.
but the amount of strength that takes is
And she
unreal.
did what she was called to
She
do.
did. She did
That's
exactly what she was called to do.
because she didn't go into that choice quickly. Like she
No, she
fasted for
fasted
3
and
days.
prayed, and yes, and there's so much wisdom in that
Yeah.
too of, okay, this is what I feel led to. Let's make sure,
Yeah.
you know.
And like asking your friends to fast with you and pray for you. And
Mhm.
that I think that is just a lost practice that we
Yeah.
don't do as often as we should now.
Mhm.
Fasting today is all about losing weight,
Yeah.
but fasting is supposed to be about bringing you closer to God
Mhm.
and experiencing him more in those moments when you are feeling hungry or feel like you need something. Go to the Lord.
Yeah.
So I think about um, there's been this situation in my life ever since it started last month. I've really started to see yellow butterflies. So if you have any wisdom on this, you can comment below.
Wearing a yellow shirt
You
today.
are.
Didn't even think about that till just now. It's so cool.
So I searched through the Bible and I couldn't find anything about butterflies. So I'm looking, and I could be looking into this, but it keeps happening. And it's like, God sometimes brings
Mhm.
things to your attention for
100%.
for a reason. So I'm noticing these yellow butterflies so much that like one flutters right in front of my face for a while. Like crazy things are happening. And so I'm looking up butterflies, and you all know the metamorphosis of a butterfly and the whole transformation process and all of that.
Mhm.
And yellow, learning about yellow, it means hope and perseverance and all of these positive things. And I was talking to a friend about this, and she called me and told me a story about when butterflies are in storms, they do not take flight because it will damage their wings.
Mm.
And when the storm is over, they can then go and fly. And I was like, I'm in that storm right now.
Yeah.
And I was struggling if I should act it, like if I should respond in a way and take action and try to fix something, or if I should just wait and allow God to do his thing. Obviously, we know the right answer, right? So, this butterfly analogy just reminds me of the gentleness of responding
Mm.
by waiting
Mhm. Oof.
and not
Mhm.
acting and trying to fix things,
Mhm.
but knowing when God is calling you to do that and when he's also telling you, hey, don't take the sword out, wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think that that is a beautiful reminder of gentleness and how to respond.
Mm. Well, and I think too, like when you were saying that, I know that in a previous episode I shared, well, it might have been the waiting episode, I'm not sure, but we talked about, you don't want anything before it's time.
Right.
And there is a time to act and there is a time to retreat.
Yeah.
So I think that
Yeah.
that's good to note.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we have some discussion questions that we're going to run through with you, and we will continue these in our Facebook page also. But the first one is, how has someone responded gently to you?
Okay, we'll see if I get through this story. So I shared a couple weeks ago, we had a very important person in my life suddenly passed away. And at the point of this recording, we're through all the activities, and so we're through the funeral and all of that. And at the funeral, I went with my mom and my two girls, and my dad spoke at the funeral. So he was either up front or he was sitting kind of at the end of the pew so he could get in and out. And so in the pew was my one daughter, my oldest, on the edge, and then my mom, and then my youngest, who is 6, and then me, and then my dad. And the funeral was just really hard. And so, but my daughter, my youngest, who was sitting next to me, kept looking at me like, and my mom too, because she's sitting in between us. And my mom put like a travel pack of tissues kind of like near her, so she had like full access to them. And she just kind of kept like quietly like handing me a tissue, handing my mom a tissue, because we both just we cried most of the service. And it was just the sweetest thing, like for
Yeah.
a 6 year old to be so aware
Yeah.
of what two grown women needed. And she was so in tune with that. And there were a few times where she just kind of looked at me like, Mom,
Mhm.
do you need tissue? And I think one point I did, and the other time I said, I think this one's still good. This one,
Yeah.
I haven't used it completely yet. But I just think that that was just such a sweet thing and such a gift, honestly. And I didn't tell her to do it.
Right.
I didn't coach her in that. It was just she very naturally just kind of tended. And this was the first funeral that my girls had been to.
Mm.
So it's a lot for them to process. And they really loved um, who we lost. And so, just the grief was strong, as of course it was, and so, but to have her just be so in tune and gentle and loving was honestly, it made a really, really hard day just a little bit better.
I thought of something while you were talking about that too. Of I think it's really powerful that she was sitting there handing you tissues, knowing what you needed.
Hmm.
So she knew that you needed to feel your feelings.
Hmm. Oh
And
boy, so you made me cry more.
she wasn't like, "It's okay, mom.
No,
Like
she
you
didn't.
don't you don't need to cry. It's okay."
Mm-mm.
And that shows your gentleness as a parent.
I think we're both gonna cry.
And I
And we
just
have no tissues.
I've never cried on the podcast.
I have. But I'm a crier. Big we both are
I
really,
am,
but
yeah.
can you tell we're both going through some things?
But I think that that's so powerful for you
Mhm.
to recognize your gentle parenting in
Mhm.
that
Mhm. I never tell my girls
helped her to
to like I tell them to let it out.
yeah,
I don't when they feel their stuff, we feel it. We
yeah.
we work through it. We do not stifle it
But how
because
many of us have been taught to stuff
well,
it or
I that was my coping
yeah,
mechanism for a very long time, and
right.
it doesn't work.
No.
So I don't do it anymore
Yeah.
as much as I can. Sometimes you do revert back to old habits, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So for me, being responded gently, I remember I waited until I was 17 to get my driver's license because I just had friends that had passed away and I was just worried about
Mhm.
driving.
Mhm.
And so I lacked confidence. So I made a lot of mistakes while driving. And one of those, I was just turning at a red light and I somehow didn't make the turn far enough and I went over a curb. And it was like a big curb.
Mm.
I don't know how I was able to drive away from that, but I was like 98% certain that that tire would be flat in the morning. And this is my parents' car at the time. And so I went home and I told my mom, and I was just like, hey, I ran over a curb. And I was like, this wasn't just like a little curb. Like I really ran over it. The tire is probably going to be flat in the morning. And she just responded so gently. And she was like, thank you for telling me.
Mm.
Like, we'll see in the morning. And I'm like, but I don't think you understand. Like it's going to be flat. And it wasn't flat in the morning, but her response has stuck with me for years.
Mhm.
And I think that that gentleness when you have made a mistake and you know it, you own
Mhm.
up to it
Yeah.
and people respond in gentleness, like that sticks with you.
Mhm.
And I think that that is really powerful.
Yeah. And I think just like those two examples, I think just show the power of gentleness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like because that has followed you,
Right.
right? And for, my daughter, Like, who's she going to be in 20 years
Yeah.
because of what she's doing at 6? And there is a small part of me that's like, are you tending to everyone else's needs and not your own? Like, but I think that there's space for both,
Mhm.
and she was definitely processing and looking at things and looking at the I want to say bulletin, that's not the right word, but the handout
Yeah.
that we got with him, and it had a beautiful picture of him on it, and she was actually looking at it in the car on the way home. Just
Mm.
you know, it's just, but there's so much power and goodness in that gentleness,
Yeah.
and I think we live in a society that's just like screaming all the time.
In conflict all the
And all
time.
the time, and like no one's feeling good about anything.
Mhm.
And so it's like, how can you be gentle? Because that gentleness, that's what's going to have that ripple effect of change.
Right.
It's not you're screaming. And like I mean, and I'm not saying that in any disrespect to anybody. And we all have different ways of handling things. I think there is a time to yell. I
Yeah.
absolutely believe that. But I think in an overarching way, there is so much good to be experienced through gentleness that I think we are missing
Mm.
immensely
Mhm.
as a society.
Yeah. Question two: how have you handled or seen someone else handle adversity gently?
So I had a lot of instances pop up here for me, but I think in my life, I've been mistreated in different jobs and in different relationships. And I mean, I don't think anybody would have said anything negative if I would have clapped back at these people. And I think it's been a really, but I chose not to for the most part. And when we were talking this out, I think there's a difference between being a doormat and being gentle. And I think being a doormat, is when you choose to stay and just continually let people mistreat you and you're not standing up for yourself. And I think when you're gentle, it's that there's that firmness to it of, I will no longer tolerate this.
Right.
This is not healthy. I can walk away from this. Or here's my boundary. Overstep it. And this, like, no, it's a no for me.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a time to leave situations. Like I've left jobs where I've been mistreated and I didn't do it in a big aggressive way. I did it in a way that was honorable to the job. It was honorable to me. It was honorable to God. But ultimately, the job was toxic. It had to go. The relationships were toxic. There was no healthy space in it. And those aren't God honoring spaces. And sometimes conflict can be resolved. You should always seek to, I think Jesus talks about that, about resolving conflict and about how to go about it,
Right.
and have somebody, if you can't solve it between the two of you, have somebody join you.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't work, there's other steps, but eventually, if none of those steps work, leave. We are given biblical permission to leave. And I think you can do such a thing in a gentle way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me, when I was thinking about this of being gentle, I like had this image in my head of like a hand coming on my shoulder.
Mm.
And I was just like, you know what? My mindset has shifted so much over the past few years to being gentle with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
that some people listening to this right now need permission to be gentle with themselves
Yes.
because maybe you were brought up in a family that would beat you down, or maybe you just naturally took on the pressure of the world and beat yourself down,
Hmm.
for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's real.
And I've worked over the years to recognize when I'm doing something like that, to renew my thoughts with it
Mm-hmm.
and just redirect my thoughts from like, you are so stupid,
Hmm.
to you made a mistake. What
Yes.
did you learn?
Hmm. I love that.
Like, I'm not trying to judge myself. I am acknowledging if I make a mistake,
Yeah.
but like, what did I learn?
Yeah.
What will I do differently? And not making it judging, just observing and moving on. So I've really noticed being more gentle with myself over the last couple years.
It's huge. That's really, really important. And I think that that's also really brave to make that choice.
Yeah.
I think it's yeah, choose kindness
On
and
that note.
gentleness. Yeah. Yeah.
So, if you find yourself struggling in any of these areas, Denise and I are life coaches. We have
Mhm.
our websites linked here in the description. So, be sure to check that out and sign up for a complimentary call.
Yes, please.
And we'll continue these conversations over in our Facebook group. So, make sure you're part of that.
Mhm.
And if you are feeling run down,
There is space for you at our table.